Hey everyone, how's it going? So last week we got a lot of information about Blue Protocol's closed beta feedback and the game development direction going forward. In this video I'm going to talk about my thoughts about the feedback and what were some of the highlights for me. For people looking for more information about the specifics of the feedback, I have made another video just focused on the translations of the information itself. This video is going to be more of an overview with a focus on what parts I saw as important. First off, going into the feedback, I feel like a lot of people were hoping for information about Blue Protocol's schedule and when the next open beta or closed beta test would be. However, being that there was a lot of negative criticism during the closed beta test, I wasn't surprised during the live stream when they said that they would just be focusing on the feedback and development direction and that their schedule is still undecided. They have a lot of feedback to digest and work on, so it makes sense they don't have a date for another test yet. Judging from the volume of the feedback they got, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't hear anything until fall or later, especially considering how the development speed may be taking a hit because of the current epidemic. Even so, I was pleased with the live stream and information on the website, as I've covered in my own closed beta impression video, as well as my other videos about Japan's impressions and my predictions of this June feedback. I noted how there are a lot of areas in the game that left players with a negative impression and needed to be worked on. The livestream managed to cover just about all these problems and talk about how they plan to address them. It is nice to see a developer so open with its player base, and gives me hope that the players and developers can work together to create a great game. Now I know there are a large number of people outside of Japan that didn't get a chance to play the game, so I'm going to cover some of the major areas that were negatively received during the closed beta and how the Blue Protocol team plans to fix them going forward. First up is the bag size and the appraisal system. This is one of the areas that most players who played the closed beta seem to have negative impressions of. I've heard that during the alpha test the bag had 100 slots and items could stack, but during the closed beta the bag only had 30 slots and the items didn't stack. This left many players feeling like the game was being changed for the worse. There was also speculation that such a low bag size was because players would need to have to pay to increase the size later on. In addition, the closed beta also introduced the appraisal system where all items would be found in unidentified states or unappraised states and would be needed to be taken back to town to be appraised. Between the low bag size and not being able to see what items were in one's bag, many players felt annoyed with how often they would have to return to town to clear out their bag. This only further exacerbated other issues like the mount with low energy, which made returning to specific locations quickly also a hassle, although the mount is a different issue which I'll touch upon later. During the livestream, the developers revealed the reasons behind why the bag and appraisal system were like this and what plans they have to improve it going forward. First off, as part of the closed beta test, the developers wanted players to proactively move between different areas as they play, as part of a server load testing, which is one of the reasons behind the low bag space in the first place. Looking back to closed beta, this system had the desired effect, but this also caused players to feel like it was a real inconvenience and a hassle to do. The developers also expected this area to be a problem before the test, but if they were to say something in advance, they wouldn't be able to get everyone's straight opinions about the matter, so they remained silent. The developers understand players' concerns and have a number of things planned to fix the problem. First, they are looking at adjusting initial bag space. Next, bag space will also be able to be increased through gameplay. Also, they are looking at allowing players to send appraised items back to storage while in the field to clear up bag space. This also leads into other changes they plan to make to the appraisal system, where items that were originally found unappraised will be able to be found in appraised states as a player progresses. Rare items and such will also be left in an unappraised state to leave players excited to find out what they are. These overall seem like great changes that will fix most of the problems players had with the bag and appraisal system during the closed beta test. One of the areas I was also concerned about was the consumables taking up space, but the developers said that more powerful consumables will be available later on, so they want players to think about the risk return of taking up bag space with such items. The problems I had with the consumables during the closed beta test was that some of the classes lacked healing, which meant bag slots and battle imagines had to be dedicated to healing. but with a bag size so limited, I couldn't bring myself to buy any healing items. However, with the changes to come, bag spaces will be less of an issue, meaning players will be able to dedicate some slots to consumables if they feel like it. The next big issue I saw players have with the closed beta test were the mounts. In particular, the mount's energy system was a concern for many players. The mount had an energy gauge that would go down while the mount was summoned. The energy would go down regardless if the player was moving on the mount or standing still. In addition, the amount of energy itself wasn't that great, meaning that the mount would often disappear before reaching one's target destination. Once the energy of the mount was gone, the mount couldn't be used again until returning to town. Low mount energy coupled with the need to return to town to restore energy meant players were only able to use a mount for a very limited time. In addition, if one were to try to use a mount to get back to a field position they were at before returning to town, it meant that the mount energy would be quickly used up and players would be left without a mount the whole time they were in the field. This energy system wasn't very appealing and didn't lead to fun gameplay, which caused many players to ask for the whole energy system to be done away with. From the closed beta feedback, we learned that the energy system is here to stay, but there are some improvements that will be made to help alleviate the problems players had with this system. First up, mount's energy will no longer go down while standing still. This seems like an obvious fix and was probably just something that hadn't made its way into the game yet during the closed beta. Next, additional ways of restoring energy besides returning to town will be added, including some sort of automatic energy recovery. This change is important, but made even more so because players will now be spending more time in the field because of the bag adjustments. Without other ways to restore mount energy, mounts would have been more or less useless. This change itself was one of the ways I thought the mounts could be fixed. A player can now use the mount to run to get back to location without worrying about their mount being unusable later. Even if energy runs out, I expect the energy will slowly restore as the player kills enemies or do quests, so it's available again by the time they need it. In the closed beta test, only one mount was available, but additional mounts being added to the game was also announced. The developers said players could switch between mounts as another way to overcome the energy system. I'm all for more mounts, but I just hope it is implemented in a way that is not annoying to the player. I know developers are probably thinking of this, but it would be quite troublesome to have to open up an inventory window to equip the different mount every time we want to switch it. Even with these changes being made to fix the energy system problems, I still saw YouTube comments on the livestream with people left unconvinced and asking for the developers to get rid of the energy system. As a player, being able to use a mount at any time would be convenient, but I understand that from a developer's perspective, they also want players to move around on foot. The energy system is one way for the developers to adjust how the players can use mounts. We still don't know how much of these changes will alleviate the problem, so it is something to keep an eye on. But when the next test comes around, we may still see players saying that the energy system should be done away with. Moving on, a rather all-encompassing problem players talked about during the closed beta was the combat. There wasn't a single big problem, but many small things that added up that left players dissatisfied. First of all, developers said that the overall difficulty of the closed beta was intentionally set low, with part of the reason being that the assist characters for players not accustomed to action games were not available yet. Also, the core battle concept of enemy party versus player party was not fully realized in the closed beta. The low difficulty also led to enemies being defeated and players not being able to experience the developer's battle concept. Going forward, developers plan to make a number of adjustments so players can more fully experience this battle concept. While the overall difficulty was a problem, there were also other parts of combat that needed improvement. Let's next look at dungeons. The main problem with dungeons was that it was possible to rush just through it, ignoring nearly all the enemies. This meant that dungeons only took about 5 minutes to complete and weren't much of a challenge at all. This is one of the areas that is a little bit more difficult to fix, but the developers talked about some of the things they are considering. First, there are some areas in dungeons where players need to defeat a strong enemy to proceed. but currently players just focus that enemy down quickly and ignore any other enemies. One option the developers talked about is changing these areas so players need to defeat other enemies as well to proceed. Another option that is being considered is making ignored enemies appear in dungeon boss fights or cause the boss to be stronger. Finally, things like granting additional rewards or benefits for defeating enemies are also being considered. As for dungeon difficulty, as I talked about earlier, the difficulty of the closed beta test as a whole was set low, so we can expect the game difficulty to increase as more enemy parties are added, also leading to more strategy required for battles. In addition, enemies' life was also overall low during the closed beta, so we can expect some adjustments to life totals as well as resistances to debuffs and a wider variety of attack patterns. Furthermore, elemental damage will be further expanded upon, with enemies resisting burst damage from types that aren't effective and making types that are effective more apparent. In addition, it is planned for players to be able to break boss enemy posture by attacking certain parts, and with certain elemental attacks being more effective at breaking parts of the enemy. While we still don't have concrete changes to how dungeons will be fixed, we do know that the developers are aware of the problems and looking at fixing them. It'll be interesting to see what are some of the final decisions made to make these dungeons more challenging. The raids were another area of combat I felt like needed work. The raid boss itself was exciting to see but didn't feel very threatening, and just seemed to be a damage sponge. They didn't talk too much about the raid feedback, but then the main changes they planned to make to raid seemed to be in the form of boss enemy adjustments. Depending on how they change boss attack patterns, the raid boss could be more threatening, which is nice, but I'm hoping they can expand upon raids in such a way that players need to cooperate to win. Another part of combat that left players dissatisfied was skills. Skill variety or the lack thereof was another point of criticism from the closed beta. There was a limited number of skills to choose from, and many of the skills themselves felt like different ways of doing the same thing. This lack of diversity also led to a lack of freedom to make skill builds. The developers addressed this and have plans to add additional skills. Also, they plan to add skill specializations to allow for different build options within the same class. Furthermore, developers are also looking at reworking the system to how skills are acquired. These changes to skills leave me quite excited to see how classes will change compared to the closed beta. If done right, this could breathe new life into battles in the game. I hope we also see more interactions between the skills themselves, with some skills comboing into each other. Also, I think that if passive ability choices were expanded upon, they could be a way of defining different skill builds and playstyles. Related to this, it was also noted that there are new classes in development, which is big news and great to hear confirmed. There are a number of classes data mined before, so perhaps we will be seeing some of them. Here are the data mined classes. It should be noted that Blaster, Magician, Berserker, and Rebellion are Blast Archer, Spellcaster, Twin Striker, and Aegis Fighter respectively. So excluding those, we are left with Shadow Avatar, Sword Slayer, Artist, Gunslinger, Splash, Engineer, Striker, Slayer, Short Ranger, Long Ranger, Imaged Trans, Vanguard, Sentinel, Heavy Arm. Some of these classes like Short Ranger and Long Ranger are rather easy to imagine, but makes one wonder how they will be different compared to the Blast Archer. Also, the class Imagine Trans makes me think that it would be perhaps a druid kind of class where the player can transform into different imagines. In any case, none of these classes are confirmed, but it wouldn't be surprising to see a number of them from the list make an appearance in the game. I'm also wondering if these classes are going to be treated the same as the 4 existing classes and players will be able to choose them right from the beginning of the game, or if there are specializations of the existing classes. For example, perhaps the Gunslinger, Short Ranger, and Long Ranger are all specializations of the Blast Archer. So you would initially choose the Blast Archer, but once you reach a certain level or complete certain requirements, you would be able to switch to one of the more specialized classes. In any case, with the addition of new classes along with new skills, looks like there will be many different ways to play the game, and it could be a totally different experience compared to the closed beta. The last topic that stood out to me from the feedback was character customization options. While I didn't feel like the character creation was bad during the closed beta, there did seem to be a lot of characters that had similar appearance. To address these concerns, the developers have stated that they plan to expand upon character customization options by increasing body and face choices, adding additional part types and variations, adding more part categories, adding the ability to change certain part angles, and adding additional voices. Another thing they talked about was the addition of some kind of beauty salon feature. There will be certain character customization options that can only be accessed at this beauty salon. This seems to be like one way the game will likely be monetized, with perhaps certain hairstyles or looks only being available as a paid option. Even if some things like this are only available through payment, I wouldn't mind, and having more options is always a good thing. I look forward to seeing what kinds of changes they add to the character customization. Overall, while we didn't get any specific dates, we saw the developers really are looking at player feedback and working to improve the game. As we could see from the closed beta test, there are still a lot of areas of the game that need improvement, so we may have to wait a while for the next test. But the changes the developers have talked about give me a lot of hope for the future of the game. I enjoyed my time during the closed beta test, but I feel like the next time I get a chance to play, a lot of the issues will have been resolved, and Blue Protocol will have evolved into something truly great.